The idea of tilling the soil, the farmer and the plow, it's irrevocably bonded in today's society and iconography. And it's not difficult to see why. I mean, you think of a farmer, a lot of folks tend to think of Pa Ingalls from Little House on the Prairie, pushing the plow along, getting ready for the harvest. But we rarely address what tilling the soil is or why we even do it. And so before I can reach my main point, I need to get a little bit of exposition out of the way to explain how we got to this point and why there needs to be a change. So, tilling the soil can be traced all the way back to ancient Egypt with its design, and it's fairly straightforward. You get your plow and you get some sort of way to motorize or get that plow moving with a horse, with another person, whatever you have to do, you're getting it moving. And what it does is the plow will cut into the soil and pull it out and throw it onto either side. It's pretty straightforward. Now, why we do this is interesting. You do it for a couple of reasons. One, you're reaching into the soil, pulling out those nutrients, and distributing it on the topsoil. So when you plant your seeds, they will have a lot of nutrients to pull from. And so what you're doing is you're just pulling up new nutrients, putting them out, and now you have a healthy field to grow on. And on top of that, you can also use it to rip out bad weeds that are growing in there, and all of a sudden they have no roots, they're going to die, they're going to also go into your soil and feed your rest of your crops later. It's a no-brainer. And it worked for a long time until we reached this thing called the Industrial Revolution. Now, it hit England a little bit before America, but I'm going to address the American side of the Industrial Revolution, which hit us about 1880 to 1890s because we were a little bit distracted with the Civil War. So, what the Industrial Revolution did for agriculture specifically is it gave us the ability to do a lot more, a lot faster, a lot cheaper. So, what we ended up doing is we got tractors, and suddenly you could harvest so much on a scale that was unprecedented. But on top of that, you could have several harvests in a year if you were growing different crops, cycling through, and if you did that, you were going to tire out your soil, but as long as you just kept tilling, pulling up new, fresh nutrients, you're set to jet, not a problem. Until it was. They did this for a long time, starting around 1890 to 1900, and it got really bad around the 1930s with the Dust Bowl. The Dust Bowl was the inevitable result of all the tilling that they were doing. Suddenly, they kept digging, pulling out all that rich soil, and it ran out. Suddenly, they were pulling up just dust, and it was worthless. It's sand. And they were just throwing it on top of all their crops thinking, yeah, we're doing the right thing here. We're getting this nutrients out there. It did not work. Suddenly, the soil was so light and worthless, a breeze came and just swept it all away. And that was the Dust Bowl. Suddenly, there was no more soil, and every farm was dying. It was awful. And they couldn't pinpoint exactly why this was happening until a book was released called The Farmer's Plight in the 1950s, which a man was able to pinpoint tilling is not a long-term solution. But he couldn't offer any solutions until the 1970s, when people started figuring out this thing called no-till farming, which is the main point of my argument. No-till farming is a movement that's been gaining traction since the 70s and is now sweeping across America. A third of all farmland used in America is utilizing the practices of no-till farming, and it's obvious why once you know the facts. It's amazing. Now, I mentioned earlier why we till, though, in the first place, and those arguments are still valid. How are we going to get fresh soil now? And on top of that, what are we going to do about all these weeds? Like, those are issues that have to be addressed. And it's so clear and so straightforward, it's amazing. So, no-till farming is exactly what it sounds like. You just don't till the soil. You now understand the concept of no-till farming. That is what it does. Now, how you address the problems that come with it is where it gets interesting. You see, now, what you would do instead is you would harvest, you would till, you would move on. Now, once you finish your harvest, you just let the crops die. You just knock them over and they just die and seep into the soil, bringing in new nutrients and adding to the soil rather than pulling from it. Suddenly, the soil won't erode and it's going to stay rich and healthy much longer term. This is how we plan for the future. Now, the second problem would be the weeds. I mean, those are still there, and sure, you've added more nutrients. Congratulations. Weeds will eat them up. How will you handle that? And the solution that farmers have mostly come up with and are mostly using across America is herbicide use. And for those who don't know, herbicide is just, frankly, it's a toxin that you spray all over your crops that are designed to target weeds, but are frankly still toxins. They are not healthy, but they are unlikely to kill people. They do, though, occasionally, and it's not good. It's quite bad, but there is a reason why we do it. Now, there is a global starvation coming. By the year 2050, we will be starving as a planet. The population will be 10 billion people, not 100, much larger. And we have no solution for this right now, except for a couple of things that we think could work if implemented in the long term. No-till farming is one of them. That will help us prep our farms for long-term solutions. GMOs is one. Hydroponics is a solution a lot of people are really excited about. And no-till farming is just one tool in the toolbox that we can just add in our arsenal, that we can use to fight this, frankly, very dark future that is coming upon us. And if we use these tools, and it's because of that inevitable apocalypse that we're frankly facing that I can justify the use of that much more herbicide. Yes, it's dark, and yes, it will kill people. It will be bad. But in the face of global starvation, we have no choice but to use it. It's the only logical solution. It's the cost of, one study showed that pesticides, which are not herbicides, but are similar, but they are not the same thing. One study showed that pesticides kill around 222,000 people annually, which is awful and terrible, and I would prefer we didn't have to use them. But in the face of billions starving, I see no alternative. We can't cut those out now, and if we need to keep our farms healthy in a longer-term solution, no-till farming is the absolute way to go. It is a knock out of the park, and it is a travesty if we don't do it. Thank you.